Good day everyone, Gromos here with another DCS video, this time taking a quick first look and giving a bit of an overview of the Spitfire LF Mk.IX, which was released into early access on Friday for DCS, and it's quite a beautiful plane. Now, it has been a while since my last video. I simply had much to do in real life and not much time to make videos, but now I have a little bit more time again, and the Spitfire release is certainly a nice thing to get back into it. The Spitfire is tons of fun to fly. Well, before we go over the Spitfire, the usual disclaimer: with early access products there may still be bugs in it, though I have not found anything big yet. I had a small sound bug at the beginning, but the sound of the plane already got an upgrade while I was recording for this video. Also, version 2.5 of DCS and the new France 1944 map are not released yet. This video is still on DCS 1.55. Unlike the Spitfire trailers, which already use the 2.5 version and the new map, just in case you're wondering why the map here doesn't look as nice as the one in the trailers does. That is because the map in the trailers is not released yet. I'm not sure when 2.5 and the new map are going to be released, but from what I have heard, it won't be this year anymore. I personally hope for a release early next year, based on the fact that the new map is already showing up in trailers, but I can't be sure about that. However, it also has to be mentioned that there were upgrades to the 1.5 version of the game as well since the last time I made a video about DCS. Most notably, there were some lighting upgrades and improvements to the air-to-air visibility. I might go into more details about those in a separate video. But well, with this out of the way, let me give you a bit of an overview of this newest DCS module, the Supermarine Spitfire LF Mk.IX. Let's start with some basic info about the plane, before we look at its ground handling and some preliminary comparison with its main competition in the air. Now, the Spitfire version we have in DCS is the LF Mk.IX with the C-wing. That is the first Spitfire we get in DCS, though VIA Simulations is also working on a Griffin-powered Mk.XIV Spitfire, so it won't stay the only one. The LF Mk.IX is powered by the Merlin 66 engine, a low-altitude optimized version of the 60 series Merlin engines, hence the designation LF. Now, the Rolls-Royce Merlin is of course one of the best, if not the best, fighter engines of World War II, and one big reason that the Spitfire was such a success, because thanks to its well thought out superchargers, the engine was most of the time able to just produce a little bit more power than the competition, while having a comparatively low displacement. The Merlin 66 in our DCS Mk.IX has a maximum power of 1720 horsepower at 18 psi boost, so that's not the 150 octane 25 psi boost version that can go up to 2000 horsepower. That is something that I expected, since I assume that there's more information available about the 18 psi version, and the Bf109K4 we have in DCS is also equipped with the 1800 horsepower DB engine and not the DC with 2000 horsepower. Still, 1720 horsepower is plenty for this relatively lightweight fighter. It gives the plane the second highest power-to-weight ratio of the 4 World War II fighters we have in DCS now. The Bf109K with its 1800 horsepower maximum having just a slightly higher one, with MW50, but the Focke-Wulf 490D9 and B-51 Mustang are both lower when it comes to power-to-weight ratio. As one would expect, the Spitfire is also the best slow-speed turner in DCS now, having, thanks to its large elliptical wings, a lower wing loading than the other three by a substantial amount. The Bf109 has automatic slats that help a little bit to offset some of that, but nowhere near enough to be a serious competition to the Spitfire when it comes to slow speed turning and maneuverability. At high speeds, the planes would of course hit the G limit before the difference in turning performance would come into play. However, in a turn fight with those old World War II era planes, speed drops fast in a turn fight. This great slow-speed maneuverability, on top of giving the Spitfire an edge in a slow-speed turn fight, makes the Spitfire a lot of fun to fly, especially low level. One of the most fun to fly planes in DCS at the moment, I would say, though I generally like to fly all of them. Now, the low wing loading in combination with the plane's high power-to-weight ratio also gives the fighter a great climb rate. But the low wing loading and great turn rate comes at a price, of course, otherwise everybody would do it. the Spitfire's very large wings also create a lot of drag, parasitic and induced, and that drag reduces the plane's top speed. As a result, the Spitfire is slower than the other three fighters in a straight line on sea level. Not by a huge amount, but still. The Spitfire does of course has its famous elliptical wing, and a true elliptical wing would be very efficient when it comes to drag versus lift ratio. However, on the flip side, a true elliptical wing would stall without warning, making a plane that would be equipped with it dangerous to fly. That needed to be addressed on the Spitfire to make the plane safe. As a result, the Spitfire's wings are not true elliptical wings from an aerodynamic point of view, but a trade-off, so it does not get the full advantage such a wing would in theory have. Well, that is a basic overview. Let's take a look at the plane's ground handling, takeoff and landing, and then talk a little bit about its weapons and characteristics in a dogfight. Now, the startup procedure of the Spitfire is, as with all the World War II warparts we have in DCS so far, pretty fast and straightforward, nothing complicated, so it's easy to remember the startup procedure after you've done it once or twice, and there are some similarities to the B-51 Mustang, which is equipped with a Packard Merlin engine, but the Spitfire is actually a simpler plane to start. The similarities of the Mustang's engine helps with remembering the proper engine setups for takeoff, combat and cruise and so on if you are used to the Mustang, since they are also somewhat similar. The Spitfire Mk.IX is of course equipped with an automatic pitch constant speed propeller, which sets the propeller pitch to achieve your desired RPM automatically. Mixture is also automatic, again pretty similar to the Mustang. You have to set your desired propeller RPM yourself though. The Fokker 490's engine control unit does that as well for you. But you don't have to change RPM that often. Takeoff and combat power are both at 3000 RPM with a 5-minute time limit. Nominal power is at 2850 RPM, which you can do for an hour, and cruise is 2650 RPM, which does not have a time limit. You mostly worry about the throttle while you fly, which controls the manifold pressure. Now, one thing that is different about the Spitfire compared to the other World War II planes we have in DCS is the way the Spitfire's brake system works, which is important since you control the plane via differential braking on the ground, as usual with a tail dragger. Now, the brakes are pneumatic and there is a compressor driven by the engine that keeps the air tanks filled up. The pneumatic system also controls things like the weapons and the flaps. The interesting thing about the brakes is that instead of using toe brakes, you have a large handle on the control yoke to activate the brakes, similar of what you find on Russian planes like the Mk.21 or the Mk.15. So, like on them, you have to hit this brake lever to steer the Spitfire. However, on the MiGs you still steer on the ground via a steerable nose wheel, not differential braking, though you can do that as well. You just need to hit the brake lever on the MiG because it pressurizes the system that allows you to steer the nose wheel. On the Spitfire you use the rudder pedals to adjust if you want more brake pressure left or right when you press the brake lever. Again, similar on the MiG, however it works a little different. Having to use both the rudder pedals and a brake lever to steer is certainly different than the toe brakes you get in the other DCS warparts, and that can take a little bit of getting used to. Taxiing is not that difficult, again similar to the MiGs and the L-39, but keep in mind that the Spitfire does have a narrow track landing gear, like the Bf-109, so if you go in a corner too fast, you can tip the plane on its side pretty quickly. The narrow track landing gear as well as the differential braking also makes takeoff and landing a bit more interesting, especially the landing. Let's talk about the takeoff first, which I think is not that difficult in Spitfire. With its high power to weight ratio and the very low wing loading, the plane is in the air pretty quickly, less time for things to go wrong. However, it is still somewhat unforgiving if you do make a mistake. You do have to be careful to keep the plane straight and react to the plane veering off course quickly. With the narrow track landing gear you can't do large corrections without tipping the plane on its wing, so you have to react fast enough that you can keep the plane in check during the takeoff run with small corrections. With the first second of the takeoff run you probably need to tap the brakes a bit for that until you are fast enough for the rudder to be effective. After you are fast enough for that, it's easy to keep the plane straight with just the rudder and take off. And thankfully that speed is reached fast with the plane's good acceleration. So the first seconds of the takeoff are the most critical. Here you often have to work with the brakes. After that it gets easier. On landing it's the other way around sadly. Landing in the Spitfire I found to be more challenging. though I am of course new to the plane as it just got released. Now, the actual landing in the Spitfire till touchdown is not much of a problem. You cross the threshold of the runway at about 90 miles per hour, flare and set down. However, here the narrow track landing gear in combination with the unusual brake system, if you are not used to it, makes things a bit more difficult. Again, you need to keep the plane straight as it goes down the runway, and you cannot do large corrections or the plane will tip on its wing with its narrow track landing gear. Right after touchdown you can do so with just the rudder, but as you slow down the rudder loses effectiveness and you have to use the differential braking to keep the plane straight. If you are like me not used to this brake system, it can be a challenge to react quick enough and give the right amount of brake pressure to do so, though that should improve quickly when you get used to the brakes. Another thing to watch out for is not to tap the brakes too hard when you do that, otherwise you can flip the plane over on its nose, as I almost did here. Because of this, I would recommend binding the brakes to a slider on your stick if you have one, to simulate the brake lever on the Spitfire's control yoke, and be able to control the brake pressure more precisely. As I was recording, I still had the brakes bound to a simple button, so I only had on or off for the brakes. Now that works, but is more difficult than having a slider or a pedal which would simulate the brake lever on the Spitfire's yoke. And you have to be careful to only shortly tap the button, do not flip the plane on its nose. I will bind the brakes to a thumb slider on the throttle of my X52. That should make the control over the brakes more precise. But if you don't have such a slider on your stick, you can still do it with just a button. So, to sum it up, touching down isn't very hard, but keeping the plane stable as it slows down and the rudder loses effectiveness may need some training. Training taxiing on the ground to get used to the brakes so you can react fast should help here. But in any case, as with all the tail drag warbirds in DCS so far, the landing is the most exciting part of the flight most of the time, and probably the thing you need to train the most to get it just right on a regular basis. Here you again really see how big the difference is to modern tricycle jet fighters. So that was a bit of a basic overview of takeoff and landing. Nothing in depth, there are proper tutorials for that. Now let's also talk about the Spitfire's air-to-air employment a little bit. After all, it's a fighter plane. Again, this will only be a basic overview. I plan to make a more in-depth video comparing the Spitfire and the Bf-109 the same way I did with the Sabre and the Mk.IX, but to do that I need more experience in the plane, and some more multiplayer flyouts in it, and some 1 vs 1 testing with other pilots. With the Spitfire just released, I did not get around to do proper multiplayer flying just yet. Well, let's start with the plane's armament. The Mk.IX in DCS is equipped with two 20mm Hispano cannons as well as 4 Browning machine guns in 303 British. The 303 caliber machine guns aren't terribly effective anymore at this stage of World War II, but at least they have a very high rate of fire, so they can make a lot of holes, though not very big ones. Those guns do carry incendiary bullets though. It has to be mentioned here that the sound of the machine guns is at the moment wrong, it's too slow. I expect this to be a placeholder in the early access version. After all, we already got an update for the engine sound while I was recording for this video. I expect this 303 caliber machine gun sound will also get updated. The sound for the 20mm cannons on the other hand is really nice. The two 20mm cannons are comparable to the 20mm Mk.151 on the Focke-Wulf 190 D9, with the Hispano cannons on the Spitfire having a higher muzzle velocity, giving it a flatter trajectory and making aiming easier, as well as a good armor penetration capability of its armor-piercing rounds. The Mk.151 on the other hand can fire high explosive rounds with a substantially bigger HE filler, the so-called Minengeschoss. So far I found the weapons on the Spitfire to be quite effective, but I did not have that much time to test it yet. Comparing the Spitfire to the other World War II fighters we have right now in DCS, the Spit is the best turner of them by a decent amount, and its power-to-weight ratio isn't bad either. However, you do have to be careful not to waste all your speed trying to use your superior low-speed maneuverability. A fighter with a high energy state usually has the advantage, if the pilot knows what to do with it, and in the Spitfire it can be very tempting to waste all your speed in maneuvers and engage in a slow speed turning contest too early. That will work well versus unexperienced pilots in the 109 and 190s, but experienced one will use such a mistake and beat you in the vertical after you are slower than they are. Air-to-air visibility in DCS is better now than it has been just 2 months ago. That makes vertical maneuvers more viable. But as I have said, more about that when I have some more actual multiplayer footage and better comparisons of the Bf109 and Spitfire. For now I don't want to go into much more detail without more experience in the DCS Spitfire. Well, and that's it for this little first look and overview video of the Spitfire module in DCS. It's certainly a great fighter and tons of fun to fly, but that was to be expected, and the quality seems to be excellent as well, considering its early access status. So, this is it for this video. I hope it was informative, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.